So I'm going to take about 40 minutes here and go through this set of tools in Illustrator. So I'm just going to create a file here, and I'll make it tabloid horizontal. Say create. All right. And here we go. So the tools I'm going to work with, if I go under Window and down to the very first item on the flyouts panel, 3D and materials, I'm going to open that up. And I actually already have it, I think, in my sidebar, but this is what that panel looks like. And these tools are kind of basic, but they do give the ability to do some interesting things. So we're just going to kind of go through them one at a time and look at how to use them. I find these, I always have a handful of people that find them useful on the sell sheet, as well as whenever we get to the print ad to do that. I've had a few people use it on the wayfinding assignment too. Yeah. So if you go under Window, it's the very first item right here. Yep. And we'll just kind of go through these one at a time. So I'm going to make a shape here, and I'm just going to kind of build this real quick. Let's do this, and then I'll make a shape. And then I just want something kind of simple that has some form to it to really kind of show this. So, and I'm going to flip that and just make it a black shape. So the first one we've got here is our plane object. And if I have this object selected and I click on plane, you'll see that it kind of changes a little bit. And it puts this little widget right here in the very middle of it. And if I hover over that widget, if I hover around the circle itself, that rotates around. And then the bars across the middle, the vertical one rotates around the y-axis. So if I click on that and rotate, and the horizontal one rotates around the x-axis. And if I click on that and rotate, it kind of does this in a 3D space. My object's still completely editable, but I can kind of start giving it a 3D look. The only thing that really is missing from this is the fact that it's very isometric. There's no real perspective applied to it. And if I come over here to the 3D materials panel and scroll down, actually if I go down right to about, let's rotate this back around. If I come down here to perspective, right now it's set to 0. And if I grab that slider and pull it to the right, it starts to put some perspective into the object. So I'm just going to kind of rotate it around to get a view kind of like that. And I can still change the fill and the stroke on my object. So I'm going to flip, I'm going to give this a black stroke. I'm going to take the fill off of it. And then I want to make the stroke like 16 points or so that we can see the perspective that it starts to give it. And I can still work with this shape a couple of different ways. One is I can go over here to, in my tools, there's an object that looks kind of like a sun. That's the appearance panel. If you don't have it, if you go to Window, it's actually the fourth one down in the list. But if I open up that appearance panel and I have that object selected, you'll see that here's 3D in materials, and I can turn that on and off, show and hide it, so that I can still make some edits if I'd like to. So maybe what I'd like to do is take that and add another track to the inside. I'll just offset my path to the inside a little bit. And now when I turn this back on, whoops. Actually, so if I've got multiple objects, I forgot, I kind of went off my script. So when I turn this back on, you'll notice that it's still only applied to my original image. The new outline that I made isn't applied to that, or hasn't been applied, primarily because if I'm going to do multiple objects, I actually have to group them together, which I forgot. So this is good to show the mistake. And I should have done that probably before I went and built everything. So, but I can still kind of edit this if I need to. So if I want to do that, maybe I want to give the road, maybe I want to make it exaggerated a little bit more, make it a little bit wider up front. Now when I turn that back on, I can edit that original shape still. So I'll go back to my 3D Tools panel, open it back up. And just to take a quick look down through the rest of the items here, all of the movements that I did over here with this widget, rotating around the Y, the X, and then rotating it, can also be done from here. But I find the sliders are more difficult to work with, but you can use the sliders to kind of do some of those same things. Years of working with 3D software, I just find it to work directly with the little widget that's on the object. So, but that's that's the plane tool. So when we use this, what does it create? It really kind of creates an image that if I leave it this way and place it into another file, it's still a vector file. It's just applying this rotation appearance to it. So I can use that. But if I want to change this into an editable shape because there's still more that I need to do with it, for instance, I've got, bear with me here half a second. I do do have a series of graphics that I use this exact kind of thing for, to create sort of a racetrack kind of a thing. But if you notice that in this case, it's all an outlined path. In order to get it back to an editable shape, I've got to do a few different things. So, but I use that on a couple of different things here, including a blimp shape. So if I want to convert this to another shape, I need to actually rasterize it and then trace it off. I can either, export as a PSD file and create a raster image out of it, or if I still want to make an editable vector art, with that selected, I can go to my object menu, down to rasterize, and that'll convert this to a CMYK 300 DPI image. So now that's just an image now. And then I'm going to go over to my properties panel, and down here at quick actions, there's an option called image trace. And I can also find that through my window menu right down here. And I can just use the default black and white tracing mode. Tear this up, put it up here. Open up this advanced tab, and I want to make sure that I ignore the white color. And when I'm done, they changed the naming on it. I'm going to click the trace option. And then click expand. And now it converts that back into an editable shape that I can work with. There are some other export features, but for maintaining the work inside of Illustrator, they're not that helpful. So now I've got that object that I can use in whatever I want to use it in. So that was the plane object. And I'm just going through the construction tools right now, then I'll look at the materials and the lighting after that. So the second one is extrude. And I'm just going to pull these out of the way. And I'm just going to start with a very simple ellipse. Fill that with black. Actually, I want to fill it with gray. Make it kind of silver. With that selected, I'm going to select my extrude option, and you'll see that right away it starts to extrude that shape, give it some depth. And just running down through the sliders and the options, I can increase the depth. It's got some twist, taper, a couple of different things. Caps are the ends. So if I turn off or if I click on turn cap off, it turns it into a cylinder, basically, or a ring, extruded ring. Turn caps on and it closes up the ends. I can bevel the ends on that, so if I turn on bevel, there are some different beveling options. I'll go to rounded, make the width kind of narrow, height. This repeat, we'll repeat that a few times, give us kind of a milled kind of a look. And then sliding on down here to perspective, if I slide perspective to the right, that starts to give me some volume. And grab my selection tool, and I can still rotate this object in space. And if I rotate that left and right, you can see there is a light source that's been applied. And we'll look at that in a moment. But that's how the extrude options work. So if I want to, so let's pull this off to the side. I want to make another shape. Let's do, a rectangle. Regular rectangle. And I'm just going to round the ends on it a little bit. And then do another very quick rectangle inside of it. Maybe this one I'll fill with black or a darker gray. Round those corners just a little bit. And I'm going to select these and group them together. So I've got them selected. I'll go to Object, Group. And now when I apply the extrude to it, it'll treat that as as one unit. So I'll apply a little bit of, scroll down here, apply some perspective to it. Rotate it back a little bit, maybe around to the left. This object is always going to have the edges on the extrude will always pick up the color of the shape that actually is of the outer shape of the original object. Now this is all grouped together, so now I can even go in and remember this appearance panel. If I go back to this appearance panel and turn off my 3D materials, double click on this so I go into the group. I can add a star inside of this if I want. Pull it down here, make it yellow. Go back out of my group, and then if I come back to my appearance, turn my 3D back on, now that object's part of that element. Getting the idea why I picked that shape? If you like. Don't feel like you need to. So, I can keep building inside of this shape just by turning off the appearance and working with it. So, back into my 3D and materials. It does have the cap options. Adjust my perspective a little bit. Maybe I decide to make it a little bit deeper. This twist, if I spin that, it'll kind of twist that shape around. Cap, bevel. We can give this a bit of a bevel on the edge. I'm going to sort of be careful with that though, because it does bevel. It looks at the shape overall when it applies it, so. But that's our extrude object. So I'll pull that off to the side. Next is our revolve. Revolve is basically a lathe. So it works best on a profile of an object. So I'm gonna go back in here and I'm gonna drop in a guide so I can see what I've got. Then let's do, I'm going to make a little more involved object here, I think. So I'm going to start with an ellipse. I'm only going to create half of the profile of an object. I'm going to create a bottle, basically a shampoo bottle kind of a thing. So I'm just going to create this, and I think that I'll add the front. Add that to it. Select both of those and unite them. And then this corner is actually going to be rounded. And I think the bottom corner is going to be rounded. So remember, I'm just creating a profile here when I do this. And actually, probably, maybe I'll make this a little narrower. I'll make that a little rounded. And then I'm going to create a cap for that. So let's grab the shape again. Put a cap on it. And I'm just going to round over this corner of it. Make it a little bit taller. So let's see that. Yeah, that'll work. And then let's give it some color because gray is boring. Let's do a light orange, and I'll do, for the cap, we'll make the cap dark red. And then take both of these and group them together. Command G or Object Group. And once I've done that, I go to my rotate or revolve, and it revolves it. Except what's wrong with it? It's kind of backwards, isn't it? making a shampoo bottle, it's not really right. The default is to rotate on the left edge. I just want to change that to the right edge. And if I scroll down through my panel, I still have this perspective option. I can do that. And then maybe I rotate this down just a little bit to the side. So in order to create, with the revolve, we're always doing half of a profile, basically. Always works best. Normally, whenever I do something like this, I would probably, if I select this, back to my appearance, I can turn off my 3D controls. I could lift this up if I wanted. Still edit that. Normally when doing this, I would probably actually give some depth to this and actually make it hollow, but you get the idea. So that's the revolve option. And it's still got taper, twist. You can offset the center. I mean, I could make that, which basically just offsets where it rotates from. So let's revolve. And then, I'm just going to keep these. I'm just pulling them off to the side. Notice too that this is a layered kind of a thing. So wherever they're at within my workspace, they'll be in front of or behind other objects. And then the last one's inflate, which is a fairly simple little thing. Maybe this time I'll try type. Let's do R. I want to make this something nice and heavy. Let's make it, fill it with blue. And then you don't have to convert type to outlines. I'm going to. But you can work with the type as it is, I believe. Create outlines, inflate. And you'll see that it just kind of gives it a bit of a puffy look. If I inflate both sides, it becomes more like a mirror or a balloon. And volume simply affects, with the inflate, how much of the volume is being inflated. So if you want to make puffy letter forms, it's a nice little feature. Any questions on those before I move on? All right. So I'm going to work with, out of everything I've created here, I'm going to work with this shape. And now I'm going to switch. So I've created my bottle. I'm going to go over here to materials. And there are a bunch of pre-built materials available. You can, Adobe has a site called Substance 3D, which has different 3D materials and textures. But I'm just going to work with what we've got. So with this object, I mean, I can decide to apply different materials. The colors that my shape had are just my default base colors. And if I click on default, that'll bring me back to my original orange and red. But then I've also got these other materials that are available that I can look at, kind of play around with. They require a little bit of exploration, to be honest. So I'm just going to stick with the base material to keep my orange and my red. You can see there's a bunch of different options here. But I'm going to close that up and go down here to properties. And I can choose the properties that I give to these materials. So, for instance, the basic properties, roughness is set to 0.4. If I scale roughness back to 0, or actually, let's go to metallic. Let's move metallic up. Metallic will give us more of a shiny kind of a look. Roughness determines how shiny that actually is. The rougher an object is, the more matte that it'll appear. The lower the roughness, you see I start to get really tiny little highlights here. Metallic kind of diffuses the color overall. And those are kind of my default properties. So all materials and graphics. So I adjusted those properties a little bit, made it a little bit of a shiny plastic. Up here where I had all these 3D materials, there's also a graphics panel. The graphics are actually anything that appear in your symbols panel, which I don't think we really looked at. But symbols are just objects that we can place within our scene. And if we go back here to our 3D panel, I could grab one of these symbols, click on it. Let's do this one. You can see that they appear down here. I got kind of carried away. There we go. So it applied that flower to the object. I can scale that up, and as it gets bigger, notice that it does wrap around my object. So I can add objects to these, meaning that I could create my own label for this if I wanted to, and apply that. So if I create a blue square around the corners on it a little bit, fresh shampoo. Fill those with white. Group them. Can obviously put more on this, but I'm just going to grab them and drag them onto my graphic panel over here. Grab it and drag it on. And now I'm going to remove my flower. I'm going to apply my graphic. Let's grab that one. Slide it down. So I can apply my own graphics to any of these shapes. I'm just doing it with this lathed one because it's the most dynamic and it kind of shows it a little better. But you can do this with any of these 3D shapes. All right. And then, so those are our graphics that we can apply in our materials. And then last but not least is lighting. And this object right here shows how the lighting is set up, but I'm just going to select standard here. And if I move this point around, you see that I change the position of my light source. What's kind of important about this is that this plane shows the surface or the plane that any shadows will be cast on. So if I want to include a shadow here, which I can do, I can come down here to shadows and turn that on. You see it tosses a shadow out behind the object. And if I scroll down, that shadows panel opens up. I can change it from behind the object to below the object. And I'll come back up here, grab my light source, move it to the front of the object so that I can create a shadow falling off of that. And I can add multiple light sources if I want. If I want to add a sort of a diffused light, I could add that in here too. But that's the way I light it. And then I can adjust how far it is from the object and that kind of stuff. Shadow bounds I'll leave alone until I need it. And then the last item along here, so this is where I set my lighting, and you can, playing around with the settings is the best way. Ambient light is that kind of bounced light throughout a room that kind of fills in shadows. It keeps our shadows from being real dark and real black. The intensity of that ambient light, I can adjust that. You see that the shadows get less dense. I can increase the intensity of my main light. Even change the color of it. Let's make it yellowish. Incandescent lights have a yellowish cast to them. You see it picked up a little bit of a yellow look. And when I'm done with that, so I got everything set up the way I want it. Over here is our render panel, and I'm going to turn on ray tracing. Things get a little bit slow with this if you're not careful, but reduce noise, and if I say render, you'll see that it gives it a relatively nice kind of a look. It softens the shadows and that kind of thing. But this is our render panel. And if I click on that again, it'll turn it on and off so that I can continue to work if I want to. I mentioned that I can add a second light if I want to. If I come back into my lighting panel, actually let's turn off the rendering. Turn that off. Come back to my lighting panel. Here's my main light. I can add another light below that. And maybe this one I bring over to this side to sort of backlight. See how that tosses a little bit of light on the back side of this? And maybe this light, instead of having a warm cast to it, maybe I make it kind of cool. And you'll see that I kind of pick up a little bit of a blue cast on the back side of that. Maybe my main light needs to be not quite as intense. Select my second light. I can make that even less intense. When I'm done, click on my render button again. Get all this stuff out of my way. But these 3D tools can give you some, kind of nice, some relatively nice looks and effects. You can place this image into another document just as you would anything. I have a tendency, anytime I use these, to actually export them as like a PNG file, like a high resolution file, rather than, especially if I ever send anything to print using anything like this. I think that having a raster file is just better, exporting it as a, so if I go File, Export as, save it to my desktop. I can save it as a TIFF file for print if I want, or a Photoshop PSD. I'll save it as a PSD, use the artboard, and export it. CMYK, I'll make it 300 PPI if I want to print. Say OK. It takes a couple of minutes, but now if I go to my desktop where I just saved this to, here's that file, and I'll just drop it onto Photoshop so we can see it. Like I said, you can place the Illustrator file, especially for most of what we're doing. That's perfectly fine. I think that exporting a high-resolution PDF or a Photoshop document, though, is a better way to go. You know, and you can make some pretty, I mean, I kept things pretty simple for the most part for what I made, but you can do some, you know, kind of complex sorts of things. Like I said, I've had people want, I mean, I think in the product ad, whenever we do our product ad, this could be an easy way to create a product image if you can't find anything that's big enough. I use it occasionally whenever I need to do package mock-ups, although Adobe Dimensions is kind of better for that. There's some overlap in functionality here. But I also know people that have taken their iPhones and used this to give them a 3D look. So, but it's a nice feature, fun to play around with, but also can give you some really rather nice effects. All right. Any questions or anything to see again? All right.